Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidi. The time is 16 minutes past 8 Central African time. And we're going to be switching gears now to a very, very important conversation. We'll be turning our attention to a crisis which is literally beneath the surface, a crisis of flooding, forced vulnerability, and systemic neglect. According to a new report from Amnesty International South Africa, more than 5 million people here in South Africa are living in informal settlements across the country, in places like Johannesburg, eThekwini, and Cape Town. And they're essentially trapped in flood prone, underserviced areas, and the government is failing to protect them. And we'll be joined by Amnesty International campaigner Cassandra Dorasamy, who co-authored the report, Flooded and Forgotten Informal Settlements and the Right to Housing in South Africa. And she'll be giving us a bit more insight on just how spread the situation is, just how much under threat millions and millions of South Africans are under, and the suffering of that indignity of not having proper housing. And I think this conversation makes sense just looking at how the weather has been in the last couple of days. You just tend to think, what's happening to those people that, are living in these informal settlements that sometimes we don't even think about, while driving on the side of the highway. Just look at these informal settlements, which we think are an eyesore, but it's people, humans who are suffering that indignity and injustice. And Cassandra is joining us via our virtual platform. Cassandra, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Salam Media. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Good morning, Salalo, and thank you so much for having us.
I think let's jump right into it. The report that you co-authored, I think one thing that stood out for me, and I think is very, very important, is a part of a headline, trapped. You chose to use that kind of wording. For people that are living in informal settlements, what does being trapped essentially mean in practical terms for a family in one of these informal settlements who have to suffer the injustice of not having proper housing?
Thank you, Salalo. And I must just clarify that I didn't co-author the report, but I supported it, and it was written by our very incredible researchers from Amnesty International,
Sure.
Whose day-to-day is, of course, researching human rights violations through the lens of our human rights framework. So when you speak about people being trapped in these situations, we look at it through the lens of our constitution. We look at it through the legal and policy frameworks that we have. And those frameworks place an obligation on the state to provide assistance, to ensure disaster risk reduction, and to ensure the very fundamental right to access to adequate housing in South Africa. And when it comes to situations that we speak of in the report of flooding, be it regular flooding, quote unquote, regular seasonal flooding, or the major disasters and flooding that we think of, like 2022 in KZN, or this year in the Eastern Cape, where 100 people died from the floods. What we found is that government's response in these situations has been haphazard. It hasn't been consistent. And what that has meant is that people have been left to fend for themselves. They've been left to rely on NGOs and charities to fill the gap. And practically what it means for their day-to-day is that, for example, ID documents are lost. Children lose days of school. If you are a daily wage earner, then you lose income on that daily basis. And there's also health hazard that people speak to when we were interviewing and doing the research, and people, saying that when there's rains, there's like pneumonia that comes up, or other illnesses from the constant dampness that are in these informal settlements. And that's because of the way the informal settlements are structured, in that there's no proper stormwater drainage. Houses are built with materials that are not strong enough to withstand the flooding. Often the water starts to creep up when it begins to rain to like knee level, and people have to like try and use buckets to remove water from their homes. So people on the ground are trying their best to come up with innovative solutions to manage the consequences of the rain and flooding. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with government to ensure that there's access to adequate housing that's affordable, that's located in good areas, and that can withstand flooding. Because with climate change, we know that the intensity and frequency of floods are going to increase in the coming
Mm.
years.
And I want to touch to a point that you made, from the fact that many of these settlements are said to be, quote unquote, unplanned, which is something that municipalities often use to almost deflect from the responsibility that they have when it comes to providing services. How valid is that argument, and how does it square with constitutional obligations that the government has towards, the people that find themselves in these informal settlements?
So I think, firstly, starting with government's own white paper on human settlements. This was released last year. It's the most recent white paper. And in it, government acknowledges that there has been an exacerbation of the crisis of housing in South Africa since the end of apartheid.
Mm,
And what we see, the landscape that we see, of course, is so much influenced by apartheid and colonialism in South Africa. But that doesn't absolve the current government from the issue of spatial inequality. And government themselves have recognized that successive governments essentially have not been able to provide on that on access to adequate housing for so many people in South Africa, for over 5 million, as we say in the report. So informal settlements are a result of that failure of government to provide access to affordable and safe housing. And when you speak to people who are living on flood-prone areas, essentially because there are no other spaces for them to move to, they will ask you, so where else can we go?
mm,
And it's not incumbent on people and themselves. And we've seen it with the growth of informal settlements. People are trying to take ownership, trying to build these settlements as communities as safely as possible. But there needs to be that assistance coming through from government. So yes, we informal settlements are to a large extent unplanned, but there is a responsibility of government. And government does have a program called the Upgrading of Informal Settlements that is there to provide essential services to informal settlements, but also to upgrade them to an extent that the communities are safe enough to be considered adequate, be it like lighting, be it replacing materials of homes with proper safe materials, be it implementing the infrastructure to reduce the flooding. So that program is there. And what we say in the report is that it hasn't been rolled out with the speed at which it should to deal with the consequences that we're seeing from the lack of adequate housing.
mm, 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 mm. I want to come back to the number that you keep quoting, which is a figure of 5 million that you're citing. How was this number derived, and how confident are you in it, given data gaps, especially when it comes to informal settlements and, as you said, the unplanned nature of them?
So therefore, we say over 5 million. We are not sure of the exact number, but the process of gathering that data was looking at government's own census surveyed data, as well as looking at what partners and other civil society organizations have pulled. And this report is very much building on what is existing in the literature through government's own information that they've put out, and from the information of partners in civil society. Because civil society in South Africa has been at the forefront of assisting, providing assistance, and supporting the work of people living in informal settlements to live in a safe environment.
Mm, mm, mm. Um, what has been your assessment of government's response thus far, both national and also at municipal level? Are there positives that we can draw out? Are there any signs of progress, or are we at a point of stagnation?
Well, the Minister of Human Settlements, Minister Simelane, has responded to our report. She said that they welcome the report, but of course said that have done their own assessments, and I listened to her on Newsroom Africa yesterday. Part of what she said is an acknowledgement of the gaps of government. And I think that is what we say as well, that yes, government has good policies in place, has good regulations, but what we are looking at is the gaps on the delivery. And we tell the stories of people who've experienced those gaps firsthand. And our report is to amplify their stories, so that it's not like we say in the title, forgotten. At municipal level, we've had from the KZN, sorry, this is provincial level, the KZN government respond to us to say that they have a program in place to end temporary emergency accommodation by the end of December 2026, because part of what our report looked at was the number of people who are still living in temporary accommodation from the 2022 floods, which is what, three years down the line, and these accommodation sites are meant for 6 months. So in our report, we emphasize that yes, we hope that this will be delivered on, but even if so, it's 3 years too late. This should have happened six months after the fact at the very least. So the report looks to those gaps, and we have had those responses from government. We will continue to monitor the implementation, and we hope that everyone living in South Africa will continue to monitor the situation to hold governments accountable to their commitments.
I'm getting a few questions and comments here from our listeners. There's one which comes from our WhatsApp line, and they're basically asking, do you think the government is deliberately maintaining the current state of informal settlements to secure political support, since majority of its supporters and the voter base comes from there? And I think this person is alluding to the fact that that's where you'll see government essentially campaigning and then doing these drives when you lead up to the elections. Can you comment on that?
I think I'll link it back to what people living in informal settlements have said, and that is just to point to the gap in delivery of basic services, delivery of assistance in times of floods. Because to speak of government intention, I think is not our place as Amnesty International. We're not a political organization, but we research the human rights violations that continue, and we do it through the lens of people's experiences. So that has not come up in particular from the interviews that we did for this research. But again, the emphasis on our part from what people have told us is just that gap, that feeling of forgottenness, that feeling of government is not providing assistance to us and we're left to fend for ourselves.
Well, there you go, Cassandra. Thank you so much for joining us. I think it was a really, really insightful conversation, and I hope we chat again soon.
Thank you so much, Salilo.
There you go. I think really insightful conversation there. Before we started the interview, I asked the question, what do you think could be the solution to the housing problem that South Africa has been facing? I think post-democratic South Africa, there's been a spring of these informal settlements coming almost every corner, even coming as close to, quote unquote, areas where you wouldn't expect them to, areas that are, have a bit higher market value than usual, and you're seeing springing of these informal settlements. And I think this goes again to about the special plan, and people want to be closer to cities, towns, places where they can work and their kids can go to decent schools. Is there a solution for this? Is there a proposition that we can make to government to say, well, you've been doing things the wrong way? The easiest way would be going about this, and there seems to be a few suggestions here. Adorazak Ishmailov says all the abandoned high-rise buildings in major cities need to be rehabilitated to provide jobs and better housing, and also there should be construction of commie block apartments en masse. Any housing project, if implemented, should also be provided with services and connected with public transit. And I think ideally that's what we all like to see. And then this another comment on our WhatsApp line: the solution is that the government should give people land and service it. Yeah, I think it's a conversation that we'll continue to be having. I think it's a sore point for many South Africans, especially those that feel, we've been in this area, we pay rates and taxes, and we're a bit closer to the towns, and we have a value attached to our houses, and having these informal settlements, being so close proximity to where we live almost decreases the value of our houses. So I think it affects all of us. You might stay in a suburb somewhere, but just a stone throw away from you, informal settlement starts springing up. So I think we all need to actively, start engaging with this conversation instead of, turning the other eye or looking at these informal settlements as eyesores and inconvenience to where we live, and where we think we should be living, and other people should not be afforded the same space. So I think a really, really interesting conversation. There's also a comment coming out of the Philippines, and I think it's similar to the conversation that we're having right now. This comes from Lemon Labrador. Says, good morning, Salad and Cassandra. Pray for the Philippines from the disasters of Typhoon Kalmaji and Fung Wong, locally known as Tino and Owan, where millions of people and houses are killed, and houses have been destroyed. And I think it's similar conversations that we are having, and the situation that we're faced with here in South Africa, where again the element of climate change comes into play. We're having a conversation with my colleagues that we are essentially the middle of November, but we're having weather patterns that are a bit strange for this time of the year. It's extremely cold, it's extremely rainy, and it's situations like this one that end up being the end product of people losing their lives and people losing their homes. Climate change again affecting the poorest of the poor in our community. So keep a thought for the people of the Philippines. And Lemon, thank you so much for making us aware of that situation. Going to take a quick break. News and views continues after this.